I didn't say the thing you're saying that I said. Anyone who's watching Destiny or Vaush side, you can clip, you can go back and watch. I feel like I'm being ascribed positions that I don't actually hold.
No, I understand that. But remember earlier,
are you listening to me?
I am listening to you.
Okay, then listen. Wait, hold on. Then listen. Wait, I don't want this to be repeated. Please.
%0 of you are subscribed. Fix that.
Wait, hold on. What was the thing I was responding to? Jeff Bezos.
It seems like you can't criticize any individual ever.
Wait,
like you just have to accept that all of them are.
Do you? Okay, hold on. I don't think you should criticize a person just because they're participating in capitalism, but I think there are things that you can do while participating in capitalism to warrant criticism. Like those landlords writing op-eds about how hard it is to make ends meet when they're trying to evict their tenants. I think that's really scummy behavior. Like,
why is that scummy?
Because in a pandemic, I think it's bad to evict people who can't pay their rent because they were laid off because of the pandemic.
What if you can't pay your mortgage because a tenant isn't paying their rent?
Then I think the institution you should take an issue with isn't the tenant, but rather a government that's unwilling to pay you or to freeze mortgage
You don't have
payments.
the ability to change the government. Why is it the responsibility of the landlord to fight the system, but it's not the responsibility of a lefty to fight the system?
Wait,
the landlord is
doing hold on. That equivocacy came out of nowhere. So first of all, what they were complaining about were laws passed to prevent evictions. So to begin with, they already were complaining about the government. They were complaining in the wrong direction. In both ways, they would be complaining against the government, but they were fighting to evict people rather than fighting to have the government provide for them. I think that's pretty shitty.
It sounds like the government was changing a law specifically to make it so that you couldn't evict somebody.
Yeah.
But I'm asking you because it sounds like the landlords are just trying to maximize their system in capitalism.
They're trying to be able think all types of... Wait, why do you... This is what I mean when I say I feel like you're misrepresenting me. I don't think all ways of maximizing your well-being within capitalism are equally ethical. I think there are ways to maximize your well-being which are quite unethical.
Okay, hold on, because you keep doing this thing where you ask a question in a very exasperated manner and it makes you sound rhetorically effective.
I didn't ask you anything.
What's happening here is you don't actually have an underlying principle that you're actually like appealing to. What you keep doing is you keep trying to make an excuse for every single thing to say like, well, here it's okay, here it's not okay.
What am I making an excuse for? I legitimately don't know if you're listening to a word I'm saying.
I listen to every single thing you said, but when I repeat it back to you, you're getting confused because you're trying to discover these arguments.
No, because you're repeating. You keep saying that I've said you can never criticize an individual for their participation under capitalism, which I have never at any point in this conversation said, but you've repeated that back to me like a dozen times.
Okay, I'm gonna.
In and of itself, participation, in and of itself, inherently, participation is not a bad thing. You can do those things in a morally neutral or even morally beneficial way. However, you can also do it in morally negative ways.
Okay, what makes it morally negative?
I think that by my standard, a morally negative way of engaging in this behavior would be, well, there are a million out instances, but I would say that I have in my head an image of how a lefty could be a business person or a landlord, and if there are ways in which they...
Okay, stop.
I don't have a price threshold.
You can participate in capitalism in a morally neutral way. That's a statement that you've made. But you said there's also negative ways you participate. Now, besides like obviously breaking the law, what is a morally negative way? Because it sounds to me like what you go on to say, because this is where you're getting caught. I don't mean calling caught you, but it's
anything. Like I will have it. I don't have exact dollar thresholds.
You're saying that morally negative equals bad things. You're like begging the question. And then one of the examples that you gave were landlords lobbying the government and saying, hey, you need to undo
people during a pandemic. Yes.
Yeah. Wait, is it just the eviction now, or is it the law? Because earlier you said it wasn't the eviction that mattered. You said it was the fact that it was a law that mattered. So which one is the important thing? Is it evicting someone is wrong? Because that's just living in a capital.
I said them writing op-eds to try to get the government to revoke laws to allow them to evict during a pandemic. I didn't say the thing you're saying that I said. Anyone who's watching Destiny or Vaush side, you can clip, you can go back and watch. I feel like I'm being ascribed positions that I don't actually hold.
No, I understand that. But remember earlier...
Are you listening to me?
I am listening to you.
Okay, then listen. Wait, hold on. Then listen. Wait, I don't want this to be repeated. Please,
you're upset
Destiny.
that landlords are lobbying the government. This was one of the statements that you made in that earlier tweet.
Not just that they're lobbying the government.
Jokes.
It was that they were writing op-eds
Lobbying the government. Go ahead.
Well, that's not what lobbying means. They might also have
What
been
is lobbying
lobbying. I'm
for?
sure there were some institutions that were doing that. But yes, they were pushing to regain the ability to evict unemployed people during a pandemic. I think that's bad.
Okay, which part of this is morally wrong? Immoral. What part of this is immoral?
Do you think
So
it's
hold on.
fine?
Wait. Hold on. Unemployed. We're not talking about my position. If you want, after this, we can walk through everything. I think.
I think I've walked through everything.
everything.
You just keep I say a thing, and then you say, "Hold up, that's not what you said," and then you say a thing I didn't said, and then we've been repeating this for an hour.
Okay,
I
so
didn't
that's
even remember why we were initially
Okay,
talking
so
about this.
your statement is that this is bad. Landlords wanted to evict people unemployed. Wait, sorry, I put people in choice. Landlords wanted to evict unemployed people during a pandemic. Equals bad. Yes.
No, I said landlords trying to get the government to revoke laws to allow them to evict people during a pandemic. I think it's extra nasty if you're trying to fight against the state's effort to prevent people from dying on the streets.
Okay. Which part of this is the moral wrong? So here's something I've written down for you. Okay, landlords trying to get the government to revoke laws to allow them to evict unemployed people during a pandemic. If the law wasn't there, do you think it would be morally neutral for them to evict unemployed people during a pandemic?
Let me think. If there was no law, then I think it would be morally neutral, yeah, because we have to criticize the institutions first and foremost. It's the responsibility of the state to put placeholds on stuff like this. Otherwise,
Okay.
the natural market forces would dictate that they would continue to evict people unabated.
Okay, so the problem isn't trying to evict unemployed people during a pandemic, because this is what you keep hamming up to be very rhetorical. You're saying unemployed people during a pandemic.
I do think
But
it's bad.
Okay, but your problem isn't the fact that they're trying to evict unemployed people during a pandemic. That action would actually be okay. Your problem is that they're trying to revoke the laws.
Well, the action would be bad, but it would be a necessary component of the way commodified land ownership works.
Oh, wait, hold on. So that participation in capitalism would be inherently bad.
No. That participation in capitalism would be as expected. It would be morally neutral. Everyone would be doing it. However, the action which is taking place is still bad, as you're evicting unemployed people during a pandemic. So wait, hold on. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Okay, let me try to think of something analogous here.
Okay.
When police officers go out on the beat and they arrest...
Wait, I don't think we need an example. Can we just stick to the tenant?
No.
I don't think because we're just going to make it more confusing.
When police officers go out on the beat and they arrest a person for selling drugs, I think that the drug war is cringe and that this is doing harm to society and blah, blah. However, it is the job of the cop to do that thing. And if a lefty was in that position and they did that thing, whether or not they were there, the other person who could have been that cop also could have done that thing. The job institutionally is to fix the drug war, not to expect that cops just ignore every drug dealer on the street. Now, if they do that, if they choose to do that good thing, I think that's preferable. But the absence of a lefty there would still incur the morally neutral action, which is adhering to the existing law. Does that make sense?
No. Can I sidestep and ask a question about that? Because I'm so confused.
Sure.
If you can be replaced for doing a particular action, does that mean that any action that you do is always going to be considered morally neutral? That action can't carry moral weight because someone else could just step in and do it regardless? So let's say, for instance, there was let's say there's a bounty board and they pay people to assassinate kindergartners. Now, you could go and accept that job and go kill a kindergartner. Would that be morally neutral? Because if you don't do it, someone else is going to step in and do it instead.
I don't think that's an institutional role that is obligated to be filled.
What if there's an institution of bounty hunting?
I don't know enough about it. I don't think that bounty hunting works the same way cops do.
Okay, what about the institution of slavery then? We'll go to a real life world. Do you think that owning slaves then in the South, that was necessarily a morally neutral thing because it was just part of the system, and if you were gone, another slave owner would just step up?
No, I think that it's worthwhile to criticize those institutions and the people who participate in them.
No, not the institutions.
Oh, sure, and the people who participate in them.
Just real clear. I'm being very careful to be incredibly precise with my language. I'm asking you to do the same, okay?
Okay, wait, then repeat.
About the institutions, and I'm not talking about how you feel. I'm asking, do you think it is morally neutral to be a slave owner? For if you weren't a slave owner, someone else would just step up and own your slaves for you. Do you think that would be morally neutral?
No, I don't think slave owning was like a slot thing where like if you aren't owning the slaves, then someone else steps up to own this. I don't necessarily know if it works that way. The reason why I'm saying, wait, hold on. The reason why I'm saying this about landlords and cops specifically is because the way those institutions work, especially with landowning, literally require that those institutions exist. The way
you don't think the agricultural economic organization of the South required slavery to exist?
Not in the same way. An individual house in a commodified housing system is either owned by an individual or what? That's it. You either own it or you rent it out to or a company owns it or something. But with slavery, there wasn't institutional slots where it's required. When you're a slave owner, you contribute.
How is it not institutional? They literally have whole laws on the books.
Yeah, but you contribute to a demand for slavery in a way that the housing market doesn't have. If you're a landowner and you rent a property, you can't throw your hands up in the air and say nope, I back out, and then that property disappears. That property is.
I don't think that's relevant. I'm just asking because it feels to me like you're falling back on this argument. The argument that you're appealing to figure out if something is worth condemning or not is whether or not somebody on an individual level, is whether or not somebody else would step up to replace you. So I think it's fair to say in the South, slavery was a big institution. It
was a big institution, but if you own a collection of apartment buildings, that someone has to own that. You can't. Otherwise, it turns into a Randshack tenement. Someone has to own that.
Slaves in the South, but if we go before the Emancipation Proclamation, if we go before slaves are allowed to be free anywhere, black people are allowed to be free anywhere, somebody has to own those slaves. It's not like you can just set them free, right?
But the only reason slaves were brought across the Atlantic was because there was a market demand for them over here. If people didn't keep buying slaves, then they wouldn't have had the transatlantic slave trade. The way policing and landowning works literally requires those institutions exist.
But if you don't buy those slaves, somebody else will.
Not if there are fewer people buying slaves, they bring less slaves over the Atlantic.
Okay, if you're going to make that argument, then I'm going to say if there are fewer people evicting tenants, then there are fewer tenants being evicted. Or if there are fewer cops making drug busts, then there are fewer people getting arrested for doing drugs. That breaks your other two arguments you gave earlier.
No, it would be good to not drug bust and to not evict those tenants.
Don't do this equivocation. I'm not saying it would be good not blah, blah, blah. Earlier you said that the action of evicting a tenant or the action of petitioning the government to evict a tenant, or the action of arresting somebody for drugs would be morally neutral, because if you were to stop doing it, somebody else
petitioning the government. The whole point of the institutional critique is to get the government to implement laws that make society better. I don't think there's any justification, whether or not you're participating in the system, to fight against those laws when they're implemented.
Earlier it sounded like you were saying that if a cop arrested people for having a bunch of weed, or if a landlord wrote an op-ed criticizing the government for a law, that these things...
Those are not comparable to me.
Oh, those aren't comparable. I'm sorry. A landlord evicting somebody or a cop arresting somebody for having weed. These two things are morally neutral, because if you weren't doing it, someone else in your system would step up and do it. And it seems to me that if we go back far enough, 300 years ago, whatever, if you owned slaves, if you didn't own those slaves, somebody else would buy them. Slavery was a huge part of the early U.S. economy. It was how a lot of our agriculture and shit got done. That if you didn't own them, someone else would. So in that case, my question is why wouldn't being a slave owner be moral if that's your way to justify what is morally?
If you walk away from being a cop or a landowner, somebody else will own that land, or somebody else will take that police slot. But you can free your slaves. Well, actually, given the laws of the South, it was actually pretty difficult to free the slave. You cannot buy slaves. You can just not do that. Slaves aren't a necessary component of the way that economic system worked at all.
Wait, are you sure about that?
Absolutely, I am. And I would challenge any history PhD to come on here and argue that slavery was as necessary and intricate a component of the Southern economy as housing commodification is to our land market and cops are to our criminal justice system.
Why did the South care so much about having slaves?
Because they wanted them, but that doesn't mean that they were institutionally mandated the way our land... Okay, hold on. You do recognize that there is literally no alternative to properties being rented. Not everyone can just buy a house when they're in college.
The South literally had a fucking civil war.
That is not... Wait.
To defend slavery. Why do you think this wasn't what they felt was pretty necessary?
Hold on. Do you think fighting a war for something is the same as something being institutionally necessary?
I think that it is the most institutionally necessary thing if you're willing to fight a war over it.
No,
Yeah, of
that's not what
course.
institutionally necessary means. The way
What does
commodified
it mean
land
to
markets
you?
work literally require the existence of landowners who rent properties. The fact that the South was willing to fight people fight wars over shit all the time. That doesn't mean the thing they're fighting a war over is an institutional requirement of the way their system works.
I felt like slavery was so okay, I'm sorry. I could just be totally wrong. So let me understand. So
Okay,
you're telling me that slavery was just a hobby or a pastime of the South? They didn't actually need it for any of their
I'm
economic
legitimately asking, are you acting in bad faith right now? Because I think more of your intelligence than this. Do you really think there's no difference at all between the two things we're talking about? I'm actually not kidding. Are you laughing right now? I'm not looking at your cam. I assume you've given up on this conversation because that was
I
an
have not
extraordinarily
given up.
stupid
My
conversation.
assumption is that slavery was an integral part to the South's economy.
It was
and that
integral.
Wait, let me finish. Hold on, real quick. Anybody in the South would have said, like, we need slaves to make our fucking shit work. It's incredibly fucking important to us. It is so integral to our economy and our way of life and our way of being that we're literally going to fucking fight a war to
Was there a
defend our
mandated
rights.
number of slaves in the South?
A mandated number?
If we had a certain number, let's say n number of slaves, we had n number of slaves, and then one slave owner throws up their hands and they say, I'm fucking done owning slaves. I am going to free my 100 slaves. And now the South has n minus 100 slaves. Is there a necessary economic counterbalancing effect which requires that 100 additional slaves be purchased collectively by the South?
I mean, where do you think those slaves went? Somebody else would just buy them up or kill them, no?
Why
What
do
would
you
happen
think they bought them up?
What? Wait, what?
Why do you think there were so many slaves to buy up?
Because people felt like they could put them to economic use?
Okay,
What do
so
you mean?
if people stopped buying all of the slaves, there wouldn't be a market for the transatlantic slave trade.